Breaking news.
Tell us, Joe.
Russia's gonna lose. No, sorry. Russia's gonna win. No, it's gonna lose. It's gonna lose. Sorry. I heard it from Boris Johnson.
No,
Just this week.
But that's been the news nonstop for 2
Oh,
months.
sorry. Russia's gonna win.
It's going to win.
It might win.
That would be breaking.
Terrible.
That would be breaking the mold.
Yeah, I was devastated by that news during the week. That Russia might actually win.
I actually fell out of my chair.
Yeah, it was complete news to me because I've been following the Western media for all the way through this past two months almost to the day. Is it 24th April? Yeah,
It is to the day today. Yes.
2 months to the day. I've been following, religiously updates every single minute of what's going on, and I was convinced. The only information that I needed to know was that I got it from the Western media, and it was that Russia was losing. First of all, within a few days of them starting, the idea was that they were going to take over all of Ukraine in a few days. They would be in Kiev. Putin himself was going to be in Kiev, with his foot on Zelensky's back. Go and take that, you dirty Ukrainians. And then by the third day, when that didn't happen, it was it was clear to me and to everybody else in the Western media and all Western governments that this was a complete disaster, that the Russian plan to do precisely that, to take Kiev in 2 or 3 days, was obviously wasn't going to happen. They had run into serious problems. It was totally misguided, totally wrong. The Russian military was completely crap.
Devastated.
They're basically
were wasted.
Horses and carts, really. That's all it was. They
ran out of fuel, food. The locals hated them.
The frostbite. The old frostbite was getting them. It was -1, I think.
They lost contact with headquarters back in Russia. It was terrible. I remember wasted. 20,000 dead Russian soldiers. Yeah,
within a few days, And the frostbite was, as I said, I've been out in -1 as well myself, and it's terrible. There's no way. Even a tank wouldn't keep away the -1.
You still have all your fingers and toes.
I do, but I got in pretty quick. Those poor Russian soldiers, that's what you get. You take on Ukraine, and it's frigid temperatures of -1, and that's it. Forget about your military invasion. It's over. It's done. So anyway, as you can imagine, with all of that, it was to my great shock and dismay, really, that just this week I heard Boris Johnson, who I rely on religiously for the absolute truth about things, told me via the media, I felt that he was personally letting me know, because I think he knows that I've been keeping up with everything he's been saying, and he more or less told me that it's possible. He didn't say he did soften it a bit, in the sense that he said that they might win, but nonetheless he said that
he sounded defeated.
Russia could actually win this war. And I don't know, I felt it threw me into a fit of depression, really, and I'm still trying to get out of it.
Well, don't worry, we're going to try and get you out of this show. It'll all be good news.
Yeah,
because it's not going to go.
What, Russia's not going to win? Is that what you're telling me? They're not going to win?
Shit, no, they are going to win, damn it. But there's good news. There is good news.
What's the good news?
We're going to get Russia in the end. The EU has said that they still expect Putin's regime to fall by the autumn. The regime change in Moscow.
By September.
New democratic dawn will arise.
I'm going to hold you to that now. September. I'm putting it on the calendar.
October.
I'm putting it on the calendar.
It's just a matter of time, because the ruble's in free fall and the Russian economy is tanking.
Right.
Well, it's not, but
if you say it enough,
just pretend it is. As one distinguished Financial Times reporter put it this week, the ruble's not in free fall. It's actually fully recovered and is on the rise again. But that's due to artificial man-made reasons. That's right. That's nothing to worry about. The market and the reality-based market is still on.
You mean the sanctions are working, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. Okay, as long as the sanctions are working.
So we'll get him in the end, but after we lay waste to the whole Russian economy,
right.
We'll get him.
Right. Well, that's good to know.
Let's pull up the Financial Times write-up of Boris Johnson's shocking comment. He was in India, actually, with the gollywogs.
The Raj.
Probably lecturing them on what they should do in Ukraine. Bad idea. Headline, Financial Times, is from April 22nd, so that's Friday, 2 days ago. Boris Johnson concedes Russia could win war. And another news item is included in the headline, and proposes sending tanks to Poland.
Right. Even though it could, well, you could read that as Russia could win the war unless we send tanks to Poland. So send the tanks to Poland.
Let's read a bit of it. Scroll down there. The UK has proposed to send tanks to Poland to allow Warsaw, oh that's kind, to pass its own tanks to Ukraine. Boris Johnson said as he became the first Western leader to concede Putin could win the war. The British Prime Minister, speaking during a trip to India, predicted grueling months ahead. Months? Hang on a second. Months? What months? It's supposed to be done by now. And said it was possible the conflict in Ukraine could continue until the end of next year. That's not supposed to happen. Anyway, the UK government has been reluctant to send armoured vehicles directly to the Ukrainian government, but he said Western countries needed to look at what more they could do to military and economically create, quote, wave after wave of intensifying pressure on Putin. Wave after wave of tanks heading eastward. It reminds me of something from history, but anyway. Johnson outlined a potential backfilling manoeuvre whereby the UK could compensate Poland if it provided its own T-72 tanks to Ukraine. Right.
Asked if Russia could win the war, Johnson admitted it was realistic. It was a realistic possibility, adding that Putin was determined to grind the Ukrainians down. Russia was also very close to securing a land bridge in Mariupol.
I'm pretty sure it's done, but
it's kind of funny how these guys, just aren't based in any kind of reality whatsoever. I mean, they obviously don't keep up with.
Well, they kind of are, but they're very late to it.
Yeah. But even so, the broad picture, I mean, it's what they want to believe. There's wishful thinking going on across the board and this kind of stuff. And it's bizarre because obviously that comes out in the media. The media just slavishly repeats what politicians say because they all want to believe that what they say is true because they've all decided on this narrative quite a long time ago that what Russia's doing in Ukraine is absolutely unconscionable, illegal, unjustified in any reality, and it has to stop. And that, I mean, we've talked about this before. I know, the scene has been set. The ground has been laid for many, many years now in terms of demonizing Russia and Putin in particular as the epitome of all evil, and therefore it was just a no-brainer that if Russia invades a country or starts a war against a country, it's going to be immediately pitched in the blackest terms by the West. But it's still kind of shocking, I suppose, for me anyway. It is shocking the detachment that they have from reality, and we'll have more details, more areas of that detachment from reality. And we're not even taking sides here. We're simply saying, just report what's actually happening. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that you have to be pro-Russian or supportive of Putin, but just report what's happening. But they don't do that, and it's it boggles my mind. But anyway, and this is from the media, right? This is from the.
So we're kind of people who have listened to our show will know we're being facetious here to a large extent, but nevertheless, I mean, this Financial Times reporter, so its tone of this article is critical of Johnson. So it's criticizing Johnson from the point of view of we ought to do more. There's pressure on Johnson as well to do more. So just to clarify, in their own worldview, which is largely echoed throughout major Western outlets, Boris Johnson's statement was the first admission
by put it back up there.
It continues where we left off, actually. This is their own framing of why this is significant, why you are supposed to pay attention to this. Boris Johnson's statement was the first admission by a major Western leader that Russia could triumph in the war, and marks a significant shift in his own rhetoric from just weeks ago. It also breaks with the united front G7 leaders have shown since the invasion began. A senior EU official said Johnson's remark was ridiculous. And would make Kiev irate.
It's ridiculous because it would make Kiev irate? And is it also that it breaks with the United Front G7 leaders have shown since the invasion began? So, I mean, where's the reference to whether or not it's true or not in that? Right? This analysis just says that it's different. It's very different from what they were saying before, which was that Russia's going to lose, Russia's doing terribly, etc., etc. And now he's saying the opposite, and it's going to make Kiev irate that he's saying that, and it breaks with the United Front G7 leaders have shown, which was that Russia's losing. So okay, that's all. That's telling us some facts, but it's missing an important point, which is Johnson's statement in any way related to a more truthful assessment of the situation? That's what the media is meant to do, right? They're meant to tell us.
Yeah.
But why isn't that in this article? This is the Financial Times of all places, for God's sake. I mean,
yeah, they do very reality-based stuff when it comes to the financials of the impacts of this war and the sanctions and counter-sanctions. They have been realistic when it comes to money, because the people reading it want to know, well, what's my money going to do? So they can be realistic, but on these pieces where they just do politics and war, it's just hopeless.
But is there a tacit admission, therefore, within that? Even again, it's not. It should be spelled out, but they're not allowed to spell it out because it's part of the information war. But it's basically saying that this is an information war, and you're not meant to tell the truth during war.
That's the problem. He broke the fourth wall, so to speak.
Right, but does that imply that these people are Does that imply that these people are convinced that if you lie, it'll become real? It'll impact what's actually happening. If you misrepresent what's actually happening, i.e., say the opposite of what is actually happening in terms of it being verifiable, looking at the actual details, you can see what's actually happening in Russia, for example, that Russia is pursuing a plan that they obviously laid out at the very beginning. It was going to be a long-term war or conflict in Ukraine. They were going to follow it through as they have been, and they're making progress in that respect. If you say that that's not true, even though that is what's true, or seems to be what's true, that you will somehow defeat Russia by saying the opposite of what's true? Is that what they believe?
These people place enormous stock in how you phrase statements, because it might, if it has impact financial or economic, it might rattle the markets, and here it might break lines, and it might inspire someone else, the leader of Slovakia, to be more reluctant to go to that meeting to send those tanks, for example. It might have knock-on consequences. It's defeatist, and especially when it comes from London, which is the second of the major pillars of the current post-World War II world order.
So it's not entirely delusional in the sense that obviously the information war is very important. It's a big part of any conflict, and it has some tangible real-world impacts, depending on
far
how you play
less
it,
than they
think. Because they think that if we start saying that Russia's going to win, then the attitude amongst the people, the government supporting funneling weapons into Ukraine would say, well, what's the point in funneling more weapons if we're going to lose anyway?
Yeah.
So, but those people have to. But if the reality is that they're likely to lose anyway, what's the point in funneling more weapons into it? I know weapons make money, and there's a big motivation just to keep firing weapons into, because defense contractors make massive amounts of money, and they're
there's an unspoken calculus, or it's an improperly articulated calculus, and you have to guess. And sometimes mainstream media analysts themselves are having to guess it all the time. One of them, and it's been said more than once, I think we covered it 2 shows ago. One of them is that we're going to lose anyway. Strategically, it's Russia's to win. It's far too close to Russia. They have too many inroads in Ukraine. They're far more superior militarily. We've heard them admit all those basic facts of reality, but the article went on to say, nevertheless, let's do as much as possible to make the cost for Russia achieving this longer term far more injurious. To national self-pride, to financial costs to Russia's budget, to rebuild a much more damaged Ukraine than it might otherwise have been. There's those kinds of calculus.
So it's
calculus
like,
go on.
We know you're going to win anyway, but we're going to make it as difficult as possible for you in the process.
Yeah, remember,
and in the process, make a lot of money ourselves by bilking taxpayers' money and funneling into defense contractors.
Yeah, in past
who supply the weapons.
In the past, in space and time, in Afghanistan, remember Brzezinski's, thank God he said it, because he very succinctly he did away with the need to read his complex books to understand his strategic thinking, because he just said, well, no, I have no problem with what I did in Afghanistan because, quote, I gave the USSR, Russia, its Vietnam. And so he succinctly summarized the point of giving the Mujahideen weapons that could shoot down tanks and Russian planes. in large numbers. I wanted to make as bloody and messy and costly for them as possible. And Russia, then USSR, fell for it, so to speak. They spent 8 or 9 years there, and I don't think it was definitely a factor. I don't know. It would be interesting to see what
as well,
Western strategists themselves can credit to the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Was it the fact of an oil shock in the 70s and 80s? Was it the fact of the enormous costs in terms of moral pride of losing to those raghead mujahideen in Afghanistan and so on and so forth? They're not sure themselves.
Yeah.
I think they go, let's throw loss at it and whatever will help collapse it is good.
Yeah.
And all these things are good, including lots of dead Ukrainians, sorry to say. That is how they see it in their calculus, because it makes Russia look bad, etc. So, and it's, but in this day and age, though, they had success with it in past events, but in this day and age, like the wishful thinking, I think, can grow. It can go beyond mere what they hope will be something that will spur just at the edges, at the margin, the markets or other listeners out there to respond in kind. If I set the example, the right statement, it's gone way beyond that. Part of the calculus today has to assume that Putin going into this was unpopular and that this would make him radically more so. And any day now there would be regime change in Russia. If we just keep the pressure up, our media supporters and outright agents in some cases inside Russia will report the facts in quotes as we're reporting them in the West, and Russians themselves will clamor from within to pull down the government.
Except that's not happening either.
That's not happening either. The reality is the polls, Russian conservative polls, show his support going up.
So there has to be a backup to this where these people aren't that crazy, because they wouldn't continue to do things that were in any way kind of self-destructive. You know what I mean? They wouldn't at least knowingly or in the short term, shoot themselves in the foot or cause serious problems for themselves in the short term. So there must be a backup to this in the sense that, and it's the old idea of war being a racket, right? War is an end in itself because it makes lots of money for powerful and influential people. So having a war doesn't have to have a specific ideological goal or endpoint or reason, or it doesn't have to be a just war. It doesn't have to be an illegal war. None of those are really considerations necessarily. They can all fall away because the baseline is war is good for countries, especially the countries that are especially countries that aren't directly involved in it but are throwing tons and tons of weapons into it.
That's the key.
They're making
clause,
a lot of money,
especially the countries that aren't directly involved. In it.
Just throw up that as an example of what I'm saying here. That Eurasian Times. That's the first link in the last. Sally just sent you. This came out just during the week as well, that NATO allies have been condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine in one voice, but divisions persist on matters of energy, trade, and the extent of sanctions. In an astounding revelation, it has been learned that some NATO allies have been covertly supplying arms to Russia. According to an EU report, France and Germany provided Russia with 273 million euros worth of military hardware that is now likely being used in Ukraine. This is according to the Telegraph. So, despite an EU-wide embargo on arms supplies to Russia after 2014 annexation, quote-unquote annexation of Crimea, both France and Germany have been delivering bombs, rockets, missiles, and guns to Moscow. That kind of would seem to back up what I was just saying, that all's fair in love and war, and it's not personal. And we may say things publicly, we may condemn certain countries publicly, but behind the scenes, money talks. And if we've got contracts for selling significant or large amounts of weapons to any country, regardless who it is, we can condemn them publicly, but behind the scenes we'll continue to make lots of money from them. And that's what most people don't understand. It's my problem with the state of the discourse on this topic and many other topics over the past, over a long time, where people just are so ignorant of how the world actually works, and how politics works, and how governments works, and the types of people in government, the types of people in business, and how ultimately money talks, and that's all that matters. And there is no morality that anyone holds to, especially when it comes to finances or making money. And the fact that most of and this includes, hacks in the media and stuff, but most of the kind of social media were most of the discussion that, we would engage in and that we're reading, and most people are getting information from both the mainstream media and social media, that they don't understand at all how the world works, and they're almost willfully ignorant because there's lots and lots of evidence that should disabuse them of their naive take on how the world works. Mm-hmm. But they double down on it. They refuse to recognize how the world works and insist on this goodies versus baddies view. And it just it leads to like a terrible, terrible state of discourse, or any kind of, there's so little objectivity or so little sense made in any discourse on this topic and many other topics that it's dismal. And any one person trying to point out a salient truth is just like it's a drop in the ocean, Your voice crying in the wilderness,
It's right there in the Financial Times article. Johnson outlined a potential backfilling maneuver whereby the UK would compensate Poland if it sends its tanks to Ukraine. That's not the first such statement. The US has said similar. Look, you dump all of your kind of Soviet or recently revamped Soviet-era stuff in Ukraine.
And then you get to buy more from us.
Buy weapons from the British/American military-industrial complex.
Which makes our military-industrial complex very happy, and therefore us very happy.
And increases the dependency of those countries on the two towers of Washington.
It's strengthening of NATO, right? When you replace, especially in Eastern European countries, you replace their Soviet-era or Russian military stockpiles with Western stockpiles, NATO-calibrated stockpiles. Increasing NATO.
Increasing profits and interoperability is the buzzword of the day, whereby Americans could come in and use and train for them, or British as well, and there's easy exchange. Now we need. Russia's threatening up near Finland. Right, quick, send X number of battalions to Finland. It can be from anywhere in the pool, the larger pool, that's now all interoperable.
Right, and it's an example of that is, and Joe Biden actually mentioned it during the week there when he was talking about the latest tranche of 800 million or something in military aid they were sending to Ukraine. He mentioned a few different, other European nations he said specifically that the US was organizing the transfer of these weapons from Eastern European countries, because they're, like you said, backfilling, but the other ones who are like overseeing the transfer of Russian or Soviet era military equipment to Ukraine, because they're going to then replace it with NATO equipment. And he mentioned specifically, he said, like the S-300 anti-missile system, which is a modern anti-missile system, Russian made, that Slovakia had. And they transferred it, it was a few weeks ago that they transferred it to Ukraine. And that I can't, I don't know where they are now, but at the time, there were videos and reports that were, fairly seemed to be fairly valid, that within a few days that S-300 anti-missile system that Slovakia had transferred to Ukraine was destroyed by the Russians. And it's gone. And of course, Slovakia will now get a nice new shiny US Patriot missile, which is probably crappier. But
the US then gets it integrates fully integrates a node in its European.
It actually
military domination from its perspective. Yeah, protection from Slovakia's perspective.
Yeah, it actually caused I'm looking for the report here. I don't know if I can find it, but it caused some serious problems within the Slovakian government. There was a bit of kind of outrage amongst the opposition or within the government, basically, that they did this, that they just handed over an S-300, the only S-300, they only had one, to Ukraine, and then it got destroyed. It's like, we kind of knew that was going to happen. Why did you do that? Well, why did we do it? So that America can supply us with a new one. But yeah.
You mentioned another 800 million weapons package from the Biden administration. That's 3.5 billion since the war began 2 months ago.
And they're doing that out of the goodness of their hearts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's all just charity, basically. That's how they, there's no kickback for that. There's no benefit to them doing it. They're doing it all for ideological reasons. And that's the thing. That's what I'm trying to say, is that that's presented in Western media, and you hear all sorts of people, all sorts of useful idiots in the West in particular, who believe that $3.5 billion over the past 2 months that the US and its allies in NATO have given in military equipment, etc., to Ukraine, that's just charity. They're just doing that because they feel so. Like in the same way,
that it's working.
Yeah, in the same way that when you donate money to a charity or donate money to a good cause, you're doing it because you're a good person. You don't get anything back from it. That's money lost to you, effectively, right? But they think it's the same.
They called it military aid since World War II. It's always aid.
Yeah. Well, you aid other people when you give.
It's euphemism for war, push war.
Push war. And
ideally to outcomes that suit us.
Right. But we talked about this previously as well, is that obviously that war being a racket, the first line of benefit that can never be changed is that when America provides $3.5 billion, or America, and it's primarily America, 80% of that is basically American money and American military supplies. When they do that, they're sending stockpiles of weapons from the US and from some European countries directly to Ukraine that get used up and have to be replaced, which is good for the economy in America because it generates more production in US defense contractors, and that money are purchasing replacement for those weapons that are shipped to Ukraine comes from US taxpayers. US taxpayers are the golden goose in a certain sense.
Now it's just...
Well, it's just printed. They're just printing money. But again, it's ultimately the US taxpayer who will pay the price if there's a negative, if there's a downside to that,
right,
in terms of printing far more money than they should be. But yeah, and also there's the ownership of Ukraine that comes from this, the hoped for potential ownership, at least from part of Ukraine, that will come from all of this aid. I mean, this comes with strings, right? $3.5 billion in military aid, and the ties and the control that the US is exerting and has exerted and is continuing to exert over the Ukrainian government and people is going to be repaid in one way or another. Depending on how it turns out, Ukraine would be looted. It's already being looted in a certain sense, but it would be looted. Whatever's left of Ukraine, or whatever part of Ukraine is left in Western hands, will be completely looted by those countries.
Yeah. Did you see Scott Ritter's analysis about the javelins? This is an American modern Stinger that can supposedly shoot down Russian jets, tanks, and so on. He says it's shite.
Yeah,
and he bases that on the number of commendations, awards that the Russian side, which already the military gives out awards on an ongoing basis. They don't wait for the end of the conflict. It's the number of awards that are pumped out to tankers. Mm-hmm. Gunners or drivers and tankers, like super high, and the specific details of each one. This tank was fired at 10 times. It has 10 markings, and it kept on going. Mm-hmm. 10 and more, up a dozen times they've been hit by javelins, and they keep working, or they're quickly repaired and towed, and they're still working. So it was based on that. He was saying the javelins are the shit, and so the Pentagon probably knows that. But again, it's like doesn't matter,
Yeah.
Well, put it in and we'll backfill. And
there's also the fact that they, I think the last number I saw was 20,000. A lot of them javelins and other anti-tank and anti-aircraft, manpad platforms. And the evidence that they're not very effective is that they haven't really put much of a dent in the Russian progress in Russia's military plan. It's continuing apace, basically. So you'd think that 20,000, I mean, what is the ratio there for successful use of those? What is it, 10 to 1? That would still be, if it was 10 to 1.
Ritter gave the claimed success rate, and he said on the face of it, it's absurd. Based on the volume of javelins and NLAWs, the British equivalent that were shipped in, to the claimed number of Russian tanks that were lost, he says their hit rate is like 4 or 5 times higher than anyone else recognizes on the books, in theory, is possible. So they were bullshitting everyone from the get-go, you know.
Yeah.
Both Ukraine and the Western media as a whole.
Yeah. But I mean, like I said, if for every 10 they fire, only one, like a 10% success
that would
rate,
be a good.
that's still 2,000. You'd still have to have 2,000 pieces of. I mean, you're not going to fire them at artillery. I suppose you're going to be firing them at what they're designed for primarily, which is tanks or, in some cases, aircraft. But that'd still be 2,000. You'd have to have 2,000 tanks, 2,000 Russian tanks destroyed, or 2,000 between tanks and aircraft or something. But you're not seeing anything like that at all in terms of Russian military losses. So what are the Ukrainians doing with these things? Are they just shooting them off into the air for fun or something like that?
There's a lot of video. They're selling them. They're selling them
go.
to DPR forces, either when they themselves change sides, or when they just want out. They're about to desert, and they can get money from the Russian government and or the DPR itself is buying them off them. So I've seen a few videos of such. I don't know the extent of it, but well, this development in the kind of Western narrative is. On cue today, British opinion makers, journalists, prostitutes are beginning to reflect the party line. Here's one from the article published yesterday from The Guardian. I think it's published yesterday. I'd love to read the whole thing out. We probably don't have time. Look at the headline. The awful truth is dawning. Putin may win in Ukraine. The result would be catastrophe.
What kind of a shithead do you have to be? I mean, okay, it really blows my mind. I mean, the awful truth is done after 2 months. Is that because that Simon Tisdall person, who supposedly is an intelligent person, has spent the past 2 months, you know, with his face stuck in massive amounts of bullshit and propaganda while he studiously ignored any evidence that conflicted with his narrative, the narrative that he wanted to push. You know, because I'm assuming that guy isn't necessarily an agent or a member of MI6 or MI5, and he's not actively putting out this information. That he's a normal person who looks at a situation and tries to report on it. Okay, he's got his biases. But for him at this point to say the awful truth is dawning is mind-boggling. It's for someone whose job it is to analyze data and report on data and give an accurate picture of what's actually happening. For him to say that at this point is just...
He has written sound analysis in the past on other issues. The British have a particularly sore spot for them, and I'm speaking generally, of course, here. Maybe British intellectuals, elites, government types, media types. They hate Russia. And hate is maybe not the right word. Like you said, at the end of the day, it's also not personal. But it's an old issue. This is great game stuff. This is like the Age of Empire stuff. It really is a continuum. Russia is just like their booger bear.
They've also been mind programmed for the past 10 years, like we've said previously, and detailed all of the ways, many different ways over the past 10 years that the Western media and governments have sought to demonize, lie about, smear and blacken Putin's name and the name of Russians. I mean, you can go back to Litvinenko in 2007 if you want. That's 15 years ago. Do you know what I mean? But they've consistently done that over, and it's almost like, so there's something behind that. Whoever was putting out that anti-Russian propaganda for the past 15 years, making up stories about, Putin killed my baby, Putin poisoned my family, Putin did this, Putin did that, Putin shot down this plane, Putin, all without any evidence, and in fact with evidence to the contrary. There's a reason for that, obviously, as well. But it's the people who take it up and believe that, and have believed that over the past 15 years, who are now in a position, ready to go, ready to hit the road running, basically, with the whole, with the Ukraine situation, and to absorb and take up all of this latest episode of an anti-Russian information campaign. Mm-hmm. And again, we're not totally pro Russia or Putin in the sense of, like, we're not saying it's all great and it's all wonderful and it's a good thing that they've invaded Ukraine and all that kind of stuff. We're simply interested in what's actually happening. And the problem is that the vast majority of people out there who are supplying information on the situation, at least for Western audiences, have no interest whatsoever in what's actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah. It's decades in the making. I won't read all of this article, but the basic tone of it is it's a lament. It's a lament.
Put it back up there because there's an interesting subheading.
A Russian victory would herald a new age of instability, economic fragmentation, hunger for millions, and social unrest.
Oh, right. So that's where we're going, huh?
Now, that subheading could have been the subheading on the 2004 special Pentagon report that The Guardian published. We mentioned it last show or the show before, because those are precisely the general things that they managed to predict 20 years ago as the general trend of where the world was heading. Those things. So they have enough of a reality-based grasp using computers and God knows what else, or simply good, intelligent forecasts to predict 20 years ago that the world was heading in that state. But the twist in here is that this is being pinned not on structural forces in general, or economic forces, but on the malevolent intentions of one man, namely Vladimir Putin.
Right.
And so the thrust of the article is a last desperate plea, as most analysts in Western media have been giving the last 2 weeks, for their leaders to send more weapons to Ukraine, as if it's going to turn the tide or something militarily there.
Yeah, well, just as you said, Russian victory would herald a new age of instability, economic fragmentation, and hunger for millions, and social unrest. That's 24th of April, today. 2022. Throw up that one that we've shown previously. 2004, 18 years ago, now the Pentagon tells Bush climate change will destroy us, but secret report warns of rioting and nuclear war. Scroll down a little bit. Yeah, just click on I'll do it later.
No, you can't. Oh, yeah.
A special report suppressed by US defence chiefs and obtained by the Observer warns that major European cities will be sunk beneath rising seas as Britain is plunged into a Siberian climate by 2020. Abrupt climate change could bring the planet to the edge of anarchy as countries develop a nuclear threat to defend and secure dwindling food, water and energy supplies. So that's 18 years ago, and now you have Mr. Simon Tisdall in the same newspaper, basically,
saying it is upon us,
saying it's happening. So how did that happen? How did we march inexorably to a prediction that the Pentagon provided for Bush 18 years ago? How did we get here, and how is it all Putin's fault? I mean, you start to wonder, are we on some kind of like a trajectory here that there's no stopping because someone's pushing it in that direction? It brings up those questions. Of course, we don't have an answer to it. We're not going to be able to pull somebody out into the limelight and say, "Aha, got you. This is what you've been plotting for 18 years or longer." But it's weird, definitely weird.
Go down to the conclusion. So the last paragraph, I guess. So his plea. Let's get real.
Yeah, right.
Let's get real.
Wish you would.
For all its heroism and sacrifice, Ukraine may lose this fight. Dreadful though it sounds, Putin could win. If the West so abandons its principles and values to let that happen, the long-term price for everyone will be a whole new world of pain.
And it'll all be Putin's fault.
Cue Big Lebowski. You're entering a world of pain. Has the whole world gone crazy? Am I the only one who gives a shit about the rules anymore? It's kind of got that flavor to it where he is a bit like that crazy guy played by John Goodman in The Big Lebowski, He's unhinged, he's hysterical, he's going to pull out a gun. And yet, he's in the same world as us. He has the same basic facts as us. But his perspective of it and why it is going in this trajectory, it's so different. It's radically different. It's just like, does he really believe it's Putin's fault? In the article, he actually makes an equivocation. He says, well, that wasn't all Putin's fault. He's lamenting the rise in food prices and the coming likely famine in the Middle East and Africa as a result.
As a result of...
Comma, bracket, he has a subclause, although that's not all Putin's fault. And then he carries on. So he kind of knows, but he bullshits himself. And,
I mean, that's why no one should listen or certainly take at face value anything the Western media says. because you can easily verify that they're extremely biased. They're living in an echo chamber, and they're just pushing a narrative that is, entirely biased. It's not reflective of objective reality, and that's the only. They had one job to do, which is to simply report the facts, but they've stopped doing that, and now all you get from them is a massively biased perspective on any given situation, and people lap it up, laboring under the belief that they're doing what they were meant to do, which is simply report what's actually happening. Okay, you can allow for a little bit of bias to come in, but if your bottom line is stick to the facts and leave it at that, not commentary here, just the facts, right? But they stopped doing that a long time ago. Everything is infused with personal belief today.
But there's an even more interesting dynamic that got us on this trajectory. If what you're saying is, if they had just reported the facts, then at least we would have an accurate view as we go into it. But, it's a participant, observer, subjective, objective relationship human beings individually and collectively have with reality. If your perspective is wrong, you will take wrong actions that will actually produce an objective outcome that you don't want. Ostensibly, I presume he doesn't want it. The Pentagon, I'm not so sure of that, and whoever's behind them, So it's not just that they got it wrong, and for God's sake, can they just accept reality as it is? But their wrong perception created wrong actions, which produced the chaos he's moaning about.
And he's blaming someone else for.
Yeah.
When it's his own fault.
Yeah. Partly, yeah. It's classic projection onto scapegoating. Yeah. Putin has been an amazing scapegoat for them.
But what's missing in that respect? Well, we know what's missing, but why is it missing? Why are people like him and pretty much all of the Western media and governments, why have they no interest on objective reality? Not an absolutely objective reality, but a reality that's more that's more objective than their subjective biases and what they would like to believe. Why have they no interest in it? Why do they not respect something, a reality that exists outside of their biases and their wishes and their desire to believe in something? Why have they no respect for it? Why do they not care about it? Do they not? Is it because Karl Rove and we're reality creators and whatever? Have they been steeped in that so long that they really believe that they now can actually create reality and mold it to what they believe, what they want it to be? That disdain
great questions.
That disdain for objective reality is really dangerous, super dangerous.
Yeah.
Just try it. Go and believe that buses don't knock you down when you stand in front of them when they're traveling along the road at 60 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Have a go. Take it to an extreme just to test your.
Well,
buses don't hurt when moving towards you.
In the West
and hitting you.
Western intellectuals claim boastfully that the West was the best, or still is the best, if they really believe that, because we, the royal we, made that break in the Enlightenment. The importance of science, and not the world as you might wish it to be. And there they rejected religion and religiosity in general, because that was warped and subjective as they saw it. So let's move into just what are the facts? Based on those facts, can we calculate an ideal outcome? Oh, look, trial and error, experimentation. It's working. Now we have a method, and off they went. But the seeds of its destruction are built into it. From the get-go, because they threw the baby out with the bathwater. It went too far, or it has gone too far in the progression of time. Today, a key tenet believed in every Western capital and pushed by every government, the world's on the verge of catastrophic climate change, and that it's man-made. Therefore, we can do something to fix it. And how do they get to that? Well, they have these these models that they've been giving IPCC UN updates based on these models, and they say they're improving all the time, and we're getting ever closer to an objective picture of where it's going and so on. Mm-hmm. Well, the premise they're starting off with isn't bad. Let's amass all of our scientific means and data as possible to see if we can map the world and predict the future, and then, you know, assuage ourselves as to where it's going and what we can do about it. But it's along the way we got so deluded that man's role is so key, and specifically his physical imprint, his carbon footprint, the extent to which he develops industry, drives cars, uses computers and all the energy they take to drive a whole computer-based world now. And Western man especially got just so caught up in the hubris that his material impact was strictly what was at core issue here. Therefore, if we switched out these impacts, go green, stuff like that, if we stop these altogether, switch off all oil-based or hydrocarbon-based energy sources, we can fix it. But
so it's well intentioned.
What I'm getting at is there is a key role for man in the development of everything on this earth, and it's even described in the Bible. Religious people never rejected such a premise to begin with, but from that premise they went off in a just terribly faulty direction.
So it's well intended. It's just folly, and it's well intentioned folly. Let's say, because that's an important point, because that's the dividing line between the kind of quote unquote rational take on world events and conspiracy theories. If you say that, you know, this is just like the kind of the way you described on it, and obviously you could expand on that or whatever, but basically the Western mindset and Western history, modern history, and how it led them into this kind of like sense of they had particularly in America, but also absorbed by taken up by Europe, this idea of manifest destiny and shining city on a hill, and the only democracy in the world, and they had a role to play, and it was all well intentioned, but it just went wrong. You can take that perspective. I mean, the outcome is equally bad as if it compared to it being intended that way, where you run the Western world, let's say, first and foremost, into the ground and destroy Western society through misguided intentions, well-meaning but misguided intentions. The end result of that is very bad. The end result of somebody deliberately doing that progressively is exactly the same. The only difference is the intent. And does it matter? Well, it matters if you know, to get a read on how the world works and who's running the world, whether or not it was well intended but misguided approach, or if it was somebody deliberately trying to create chaos and the destruction of Western civilization. I think it's an important point, at least from an understanding point of view. But because, I mean, there's been plenty of, if you just go to BD News 24, Scotty, the headline kind of sums it up in a way. It's about the kind of embargoes, sanctions that have been imposed recently. You got it there? bdnews24.com. Yes? No? Communication? Ain't got nothing. Okay. Here it is. The headline is Europe reluctantly readies Russian oil embargo. This is from about a week ago or so. So it's something you're probably already aware of. It's been in the news that European countries are drafting plans for an embargo on Russian oil products. Now, this isn't gas, obviously, because, you know, gas is slightly different, but gas might follow in theory. Embargo on Russian oil products, the most contested measure yet to punish Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. But it says they're reluctant to do this. Now, why would they be reluctant to do it? Well, the reason that they're reluctant to do it should be pretty obvious. When you cut off energy supplies that you're dependent on, i.e. that your people primarily are dependent on, if you cut those off, then you're going to cause a lot of suffering amongst the population. Yeah. But if you go ahead and do that and cause suffering amongst your population on the basis of some ideological kind of war that you're fighting against Russia for reasons that have nothing to do with what you say they have to do with, because it's not about saving Ukraine, it's not about protecting the Ukrainian people, it's about something else. We haven't really maybe touched on that or delved into that deeply enough in the sense of what the Western problem with Russia is. You know, it's not about saving Ukrainian people. It's not ideological. It might be at the level of, you know, your common or garden political type and media hack or whatever. But for the people actually pulling the strings, they don't care about the Ukrainian people. If they cared about the Ukrainian people, they would not be fueling the fire of this war. Mm-hmm. They would not be contributing to the continuation of the war. And as we've mentioned, and as they've been explicit about, they want to prolong it and drag it out as much as possible and make quote unquote Putin suffer. But in that process, they will increase the suffering of the Ukrainian people. So they don't care about the Ukrainian people, obviously. So what is their ideology then? It's not practical. It's some other ideology that's pushing them to do that, and also to take these extreme measures, as in this article, of cutting off the energy supply to European people from Russia and causing them to suffer.
Yeah, and here the destruction seems to be willful.
Right, but that's what gets them.
We've crossed now and then. It's undeniable, or it's even rarely it's articulated in some way. I have a related article actually.
Well, let me just go through
on.
this one because it's just interesting in terms, because people have been saying that, and today we should mention that today is the French elections. We'll maybe just discuss that later on very briefly, but it's between Macron and Le Pen. Macron being more or less an Atlanticist, a NATO lover, and the usual suspect, and Le Pen, in theory, his opponent, in theory, being more of a she's a right-wing extremist, right? So, which means that
nationalist.
She's a nationalist, which means that she would be more, a bit more friendly towards Putin, a bit more friendly towards Russia, but maybe less likely to impose these catastrophic embargoes on Russian energy for Europe, that kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. We're not going to call it one way or the other at this point, but anyway. Let me see, just go down timeline. People have said that basically, and that's why I mentioned the French elections, people have said that this embargo on oil, on Russian oil, that's being put together by European nations under the stewardship of the US, of course, because the US is very happy if Europe stops buying Russian oil, because they'll have to buy American oil and oil from other sources. But so they've been planning to put together this embargo on Russian oil, but there's reluctance among certain European countries because primarily the ones that are more dependent on Russian oil than others, right? The UK is very happy to push this embargo on Russian oil because it doesn't get much oil from Russia, whereas, for example, Germany or Austria and a few other Eastern European states do get a lot of oil from Russia. But anyway, but officials and diplomats who spoke on condition of anonymity. And sorry, I should just add that the idea was that they would wait until after the French elections, to impose this embargo, the first serious energy embargo on oil, first and foremost.
Giving away the fact that they know it's vastly unpopular.
Right. They wait until after the French elections, so it's not, because if it happened, it would be seen as a Macron administration move, and the French people would be very unhappy about it, because suddenly the price of gas at the petrol station, or petrol at the gas station, or diesel at the petrol station.
We're all American now.
Anyway, that it would increase and people would be unhappy, so they're waiting till he wins, supposedly, and then they'll do it and say, too late, you can't complain about it, you already voted for me, I suppose. But anyway, in this article, basically they're saying that it's not just that they're waiting until after the French elections, but rather there is not the unity that they claim there is for this kind of an embargo in the European Union, for obvious reasons. They're trying hard to get everybody to toe the line, but officials and diplomats who spoke on condition of anonymity, because they were not authorized to discuss the matter, said that there was a growing sense that the measure would be taken even in the absence of a so-called trigger, another major news event like the atrocities in Bucha, Ukraine, but an event of that type could move the decision forward. And that's interesting because we talked about Bucha before, and people who are familiar with it should realize that, Bucha was very likely a put-up job. It was a staged provocation, staged scenario designed to do precisely what it did, which was to demonize Putin and get people on board. And again, it gets
grotesque.
back.
This guy just speaking on under conditions of anonymity, just gave away the disgusting fact that we navigate quote unquote democracy in the West by emotionally manipulating and blackmailing our population.
Yeah. But a handful of its members are also ill-prepared to deal with the economic consequences from closing the tap on Russian oil imports. Russia is the EU's largest oil supplier, providing the bloc with 1/4 of its oil and petroleum product imports in 2020. Germany, highly dependent on Russian oil and gas, has been a key country resisting a quick, universal and simultaneous EU-wide oil embargo, and much of the work around the details of the measure is focused on ensuring that Berlin comes on board. Now, you might see some serious issues or some serious pressure put on the German government. You might even see a change in the European government as a result of the German government as a result of US
there
pressure.
There are calls for him to resign
already.
this week. To resign, he's in the job 2 months.
Germany gets 34% of its oil from Russia. A key challenge will not only be to find alternative supplies, but to make up for that. But also to line up sufficient land transport for oil heading to its 2 refineries that are fed by pipelines from Russia. So basically, the tenor of this is that it's going to be phased in supposedly on a progressive basis. It's not going to be immediately after today when Macron supposedly is going to be shooed in to win. That it'll be throughout the summer. They don't know what they're talking about.
It's a tight timetable. They're claiming by the end of this year.
August, September, whatever. But again, that's putting it off. You know what I mean?
Pipe dream.
Literally a pipe dream.
Article doesn't even mention coal. Germany's dependence on Russian coal is higher.
Right.
It's higher.
Yeah. Well, coal is part of the whole narrative about. Coal was a big part of the narrative about climate change, right? Mm-hmm. We're all going to save the planet. Especially the UK up in the COP, the COP26 or whatever it was last year up in Scotland, where they all got together in their Tesla cars and said they were going to save the planet. Well, as a result of this policy, this ideological move to this anti-Russian ideology that has nothing to do with saving the Ukrainian people or sparing the Ukrainian people, whatever the motivation is, that's leading them to impose these energy embargoes or plan to impose these energy embargoes on Russia. They're doing that obviously to quote unquote support the Ukrainian people and to fight against Russia, even though that's obviously not the reason. But they're also doing it because it'll be good for the planet, right? Because they'll reduce use of forced reduction in use by the population of oil and gas and a transition to a green economy, right?
But spell that out, you'll kill off lots of people.
You'll kill off lots of people, but in the process, they're not so delusional, because if you just put up that one I just sent you, Scotty, the UK has just approved its first new coal mine in 30 years.
This is the issue.
But coal was a big problem for climate change.
Right.
It was like, and China, which uses the most coal in the world, is pumping out that all that pollution from coal, and everybody has to stop it. And the UK COP26 in Glasgow last year, the UK leading the charge to protect the climate, cut off in particular coal usage of burning of coal. And now they're opening a new coal mine because
this is the thing. I think we're going to see it sooner rather than later. We still don't know, despite all the information campaigns, despite all the small token gestures like recycle your plastics and stuff like that. We still don't really know yet if this is going to be actuated. That suggests it's not. The UK behind the virtual signalling, and it looks like political wankery, excuse my language, because in reality they're doing the opposite of what they say they're doing. Where the rubber will hit the road is if all this talk, which is very urgent right now because of Russia and Ukraine, is going to actually become real. Are they really going to go for it? Are they going to cut off Russian energy to Europe? If that happens, then we'll know they're serious. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Here's another one, the kind of pressure that Germany is coming under. Can you put up the link I just sent you from the Telegraph from 3 days ago? Headline: If Germany won't stop buying Russian gas, it should face sanctions too.
Sanctions Germany.
Subheadline: Anyone buying German goods right now is effectively funding Putin's war. I mean, okay, so he's British Telegraph, so
he's a douchebag.
It's easy. It's easier for the British to put that kind of pressure on Germany because they're not anywhere near as dependent on Russia.
And also because they killed my granny in the war.
Right.
That unity only goes so far, you know what I mean? It's the English have a long-standing antipathy for the Krauts, you know what I mean? It's not.
Der Spiegel interviewed Schultz yesterday. First question. I won't bother putting it up. First question. So, are you some kind of pacifist? And it just spent the whole time, like, this was a serious German newspaper, and it spent the whole time berating its new chancellor about do more for Ukraine, do more, send more, whatever, just do it. You know, this pressure is coming
madness
primarily from the US and the UK,
right? Of course, yeah.
But getting back to the topic, the subtopic we moved on to, are they really serious about cutting off their legs to spite their face?
But whose legs are they cutting off? And do they are
Western peoples?
Not
people,
their own,
anyone,
right? Not their own.
People in Africa will go hungry.
Right. Well, but they care so much about the ordinary people of this world, don't they? Isn't it? That's the idea, right? That's the belief that underpins any belief in what they say, or any credibility given to what they say, which is that these people, these politicians, are humanitarians, effectively, that they really care about the ordinary people of this world. And that they keep, they present that image, they tried hard to present that image to the population, while what they're doing is clearly going to achieve exactly the opposite in terms of its impact on the population. It's going to have a seriously negative impact on the population and make them suffer a lot. While we're telling you we're doing this for your own good and getting you to come on board with it. Get on board with taking cold showers. Get on board with having no food. Get on board with starving. For what? To save who? To save the Ukrainian people that we're facilitating the slaughter of?
Yeah.
I mean, do you have to have a big brain to think your way through this?
No, you just have to not have the memory of a goldfish to remember that 2 years ago, exactly the same things were being said to you to save Granny.
Or to have some critical thinking ability, a basic critical thinking ability that isn't usurped by some emotional manipulation, where your ability to think clearly using simple A plus B equals C and reading reality as it is isn't usurped by incessant emotionally manipulative programming from the media and from governments. I mean,
think about where what we're suggesting here, what it's implying for people to grasp, that there's a concerted effort by the powers that be to kill off a lot of them. I mean, no wonder there's a brain fart moment.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But they don't even have to go there.
It's like deer in the headlights.
There's an alternative to going there, to having to accept that, which I accept is difficult for a lot of people. And I'm not saying they should, but the alternative, we expelled out the alternative a little while ago, which is that it's misguided folly. They've lost the plot. These people are just, while they may have good intentions, they may be trying to
save the planet, save Ukrainians, whatever it is,
the humanitarian cause,
boost democracy,
but that it's going to have a very bad effect. And people should understand that can happen. They probably have experience in their own lives of people with good intentions creating very bad situations. So all you have to do is look at where the obvious end point of this whole, particularly the energy business on energy embargoes on Russia, is that people are going to starve.
Yeah.
First in North African countries and Middle Eastern countries, and then in Europe. It's going to be widespread food shortages and energy shortages. You're going to have only a certain amount of electricity during the day, a certain amount of heating during the day, and you're going to have not enough food to feed your family. And it will be as a result of the policies that are being pursued now by your government. You can ascribe any whatever motivation you want to those politicians in doing that. It doesn't change the fact that that's what they're doing and that's the result that they're going to get. So you should recognize that. And I'm not saying even you should do something about it, but you should at least recognize it so you can maybe prepare yourself to avoid the worst impacts of it.
Agreed. It seems that those shouting loudest and those throwing the Molotov cocktails at Eastern Europe, we got a hint of this when they first forewarned us about upcoming massive sanctions against the Russian economy in December last year, when they acknowledged in their announcement of these crippling sanctions that this would impact average consumers in Europe.
Well, they've been explicit about it, yeah.
And then they went on to say, well, but it was an American announcing this and speaking under a condition of anonymity, but it won't affect our economy.
As much.
That's probably wishful thinking, but I think it gives something away. I think it gives away the fact that there's a kind of a hierarchy of expendables. First, the Africans can starve, Middle Easterners can starve, whatever. You're written off. From the perspective of Washington, London, you're on the lower rung. Secondly, Eastern Europeans, they're goading Romania, Poland, and now Germany. Go on, go into Ukraine, have the fight. They don't mind. And we have history to fall back on for this.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking,
They're
not the two. They're not identical. But broadly speaking, when you take not just so much the Russian perspective, but try and step out and look at what happened overall in a quick summary, a news bite roundup of World War II, more or less, Nazi Germany declares war firstly on Western Europe, but there was a phony war. A connivance, a capitulation. The French have forever been mocked for basically embracing it on the surface. Nordic countries, etc. And then there was the infamous incident in Dunkirk where they were retreating British forces from Belgium. The Panzer divisions are doing blitzkrieg and they stop and they give them 3 days to evacuate. You know? Okay. But then it turns around. The whole rest of the war, the bulk of the actual war is in the other direction. And Washington and London just sat back and kind of bit their nails for 4 years. When Russia turned it around in Stalingrad, when they were moving through Ukraine faster than the Blitzkrieg moved in the other direction.
That's when
they went,
let's go.
There's this terrible moral crisis, terrible war happening in Europe. Best get involved.
Well, they had been involved up to that point by funneling, again, like as they're doing in Ukraine, large amounts of weapons into the countries that were fighting with each other and putting them on, saddling them with debt, with massive debt that I mentioned last week. Germany only finished repaying its debt to America from the Second World War in 2011. So that's what America did, primarily in the Second World War. A snapshot of the Second World War is that America threw tons and tons of weapons into the war while everybody else fought it, and Europe got destroyed, and then afterwards took over Europe through calling in debts in different ways. So yeah, I mean that's the
my point is
for it, right?
That's how extreme the situation can get in terms of it appears on the surface that they're willfully destroying themselves, but actually they can throw a lot of other people under the bus first.
For sure,
and those other people don't learn the bloody lessons. Poland today, I give it 5 years, Poland surviving as a viable independent nation state.
If it doesn't change course.
Not because Russia has designs on you per se, but it's going to get ground up if this spread of NATO weapons and this increasing bellicosity, all encouraged from London and Washington, chucking everything they can at it and pushing the Poles in front of it.
Yeah.
They don't learn.
Yeah.
You know,
well, some of us, a lot of people don't learn, but the opportunity is there for other people to learn. Like is that poster says, sometimes there's a poster of a sinking ship, picture of a sinking ship, and the caption underneath it is that sometimes the purpose of your life is to serve as a warning to other people.
Right.
Just throw up the MSN.com here, just on this same topic. It's the first set I sent you, Scotty. MSN.com. This is another example of just kind of it bakes my noodle, This is from just today or a couple of days ago or something like that. EU says the EU has come up with a genius way to pay for Russian gas in euros to avoid breaching sanctions, right? And the details are that EU companies may be able to work around Russia's demand to receive gas payment in rubles without breaching sanctions if they pay in euros or dollars, which are then converted into the Russian currency, the European Commission said on Friday. Good job, European Commission. You have just basically spelled out exactly what the Russians said you had to do 2 weeks ago.
No.
They said, you can pay for our gas in whatever currency you want. All you have to do is open up a bank account in Russia, and you can pay in euros, pay in dollars, whatever, and then you will pay for the conversion of that currency into rubles, and then those rubles will be used to pay Gazprom or the Russian oil, Rosneft. Is that the Russian oil company? Anyway,
Rosneft, yeah.
So, but it's amazing. Like they come up with like, hey, we just had a really good idea to circumvent not circumvent sanctions, but to avoid breaching sanctions, to do our part, to screw over Russia, and it's really genius. We've got the big brains here in Brussels, and we've figured it out. And it's like, and they just do exactly what the Russian government told them they had to do 2 weeks ago, and they announce it as if it's like breaking news.
Yeah,
that's why I look at this stuff and I go, Jesus Christ, you people are.
Yeah.
So they've no intentions, obviously, of not paying for Russian gas.
No.
And I don't know if they've much in the way of intentions of not paying for Russian oil either. We're going to see. And it depends on the extent to which the US can put pressure on in all sorts of different ways, including blackmail and threats and all that kind of stuff on European governments to cut off Russian oil at least. But
and assassinations. Did you hear about we're up to 4 now, Gazprom connected oligarchs / executives who've been killed in the last month or so. I just sent it to you, Scotty. This is Daily Mail. This is Daily Mail reporting about last week, 2 guys on the same day. Headline, mystery over 4 suspicious suicides of Russian gas executives. 2 more top industry figures linked to Putin's circle are revealed to have killed themselves amid probes into murder suicides of 2 businessmen and their families. Sergei Protasenia was found hanged in Spain with his wife and daughter killed. Specifically, they were stabbed to death and then he was hanged. No suicide note left, no fingerprints on the weapon. Earlier, same day, I think, Vladislav Avayev, his wife and daughter, died in another murder-suicide, and that was in St. Petersburg. And then back in February, 2 further gas executives died in suspicious circumstances. It's a gruesome story, especially the 2 murder-suicides of the 2 families. Scroll down there. Which is the relevant details. Investigators initially assumed that Protasenia, who had a fortune of £330 million, had killed himself. Yeah, that's near Barcelona. The businessman had served as deputy chairman of natural gas company Novotech. So yeah, he once was in Russian government, but at the time of his death, he was working for. Scroll down. They'll name exactly. It's not Gas. I think it's Gazprom Bank, or it's a key subsidiary. Scroll down a bit more.
Past the Goss.
Yeah. Well, this other second guy, the one who was killed in Petersburg, Avayev was previously a vice president at Gazprom Bank. In both cases, there are suspicions that the deaths may have been staged as suicides. Well, that's interesting because right from the get-go, the news report, the British media here is spinning this as, oh, well, that's doubtful that there were suicides, that somebody killed and made it look like a murder-suicide. And they're implying, of course, as we've had with many other instances of Russian oligarchs or whatever living abroad, that they were killed by Putin. Mm-hmm. But we can flip this easily. This is way open. This is more likely, in my book, to be something that was done to Russia rather than to work against Russia, you know? Mm-hmm. It's definitely It's definitely related. They happened on the same day, 2 countries apart, one in Russia, one in Spain. And they are big players. Now, interestingly, both were not on any sanctions list. So they can call them oligarchs all they want and claim to have stolen wealth all they want, but both were not on the US sanctions list.
I think it's open as to who was behind it, but that's, in the game that the US has, the conditions of the game that the US has set. You know what I mean? It's a dangerous business to be in, especially at this time in the world. So I mean, who knows? One other major trigger. We can now use that term trigger from that last article about the triggers that would provoke sanctions. I.e., they mentioned Bucha as a trigger, getting European countries on board to take more actions against Russia. Another trigger this week was Mariupol, at least an attempted trigger. Just throw up the BBC article as one example of. For a few days there, we kind of blanket coverage of this, and I think it might still actually be on a lot of the. A lot of the major Western media outlets. Mariupol satellite images suggest mass graves dug near besieged city. So again, it's it stands out as one of those, one of those stories or messages that springs up in the Western media, fully formed, and there's only one conclusion that any reasonable person should draw from it, which is that Russia is evil and they're committing war crimes and killing civilians in Ukraine, blah, 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 blah. Luckily, again, satellite image, that's the best the BBC has. That image, you're meant to be able to draw whatever you can, draw the obvious conclusion from that satellite image that this NSA provided to the BBC or provided to the media, that here's evidence of Russia having killed, because mass burial, trenches or something, I suppose. They're meant to be trenches that they just dump loads of civilian bodies into, because Russia killed all these civilians, because that's what Russia's doing in Ukraine. It's killing all these civilians for fun or because they want to. Luckily, someone we know personally, Ava Bartlett, she likes to travel around and stick her nose in places that she shouldn't. At least the Western governments would like her not to. If you just put up the YouTube link, it's a short little video, and Ava went to Mariupol, because Mariupol is now basically liberated, if you want to call it that. And she has this pretty short little report from that specific site that the satellite image was showing.
Interesting.
Just outside Mariupol. Go ahead.
Western media is awash with new accusations against Russia, this time accusing Russia of secret burials and mass graves in a town west of the city of Mariupol. Accusations are that Russian forces threw up to 9,000 civilians into a mass grave in an effort to cover up their alleged war crimes. Reports cite Ukrainian officials, notably the former mayor of Mariupol, no longer in the city, as the source of what he calls, quote, barbaric war crimes, and according to him, Russians dug huge trenches 30 meters wide and chucked people in. So with journalist Roman Kosarev on April 23rd, I went to the site in question to see whether or not there actually is a mass grave. It is Saturday, April 23rd, and I'm at the site of what Western media are alleging are mass graves. Now, these are clearly new graves, and there in the distance is an existing cemetery, as media have noted. This is a marking of a person that was born in 1941, has their name, has the date of their birth, and it's obviously a known site. Now, there are also unknown graves, and they are simply numbered, but there are many that are actually marked with date of birth, or at least with name. Here we go, another one, 1964.
Open the audio.
This is the second plot. These are not occupied graves. And then these are all completely empty. There's one beyond. For the sake of accuracy, I'll take a jog down that way. I mean, this is just now, at this point, 2 rows, one of which is vacant. And that's it. Western media. Nothing else.
I've seen that back in 2015, 2014 as well, where mass graves were discovered as Azov or Aidar retreated. It's in the Donetsk region. And we saw mass graves with civilians. I even saw a woman that she was dug up. She had her arms tied behind her back. And she was pregnant, like in the latest stage of pregnancies. And she had a hole in her head, so that means she was executed. So mass graves is something that they do. They've done quite a bit. Mass graves, at least according to the head of Donetsk People's Republic, Denis Pashalin, at least 300 sites have been discovered since 2014.
Захораниваем мирных людей, которых привозили с Мариуполя, первых из погибших. Это 2 квадрата, вот квадрат, и этот квадрат специально предназначены для мирного населения. Всех хоронили, как говорится, под номерами, которые опись ведется в морге, особые приметы, у кого были документы, на табличках указаны фамилия, имя, отчество. Всех хоронили в отдельных могилах и в гробах.
Можно теперь вам вопрос задать? Вот западные СМИ сейчас про это место говорят, что здесь они говорят, у нас есть снимки со спутника, здесь ямы 30 на 40 метров, куда российская армия сбрасывает трупы мариупольцев. Вот я вам сейчас доставил новость. Что вы про это думаете?
Это все бред, это фейки. Во-первых, здесь есть одна могила на одного человека. Человек хоронится в гробах. Есть ниже даже захороненные военнослужащие украинской армии, которые захоронены в гробах, в отдельной могиле. Если он опознан, у него есть табличка, либо же он под номером. И найти его как бы можно. Нету здесь массовых могил, захоронений не было.
Это не братские могилы, и никто тут никого не, как говорится, в общую могилу не сваливают. Каждому человеку, хоть какой он, ВСУшник или мирный, это без разницы, это человек все-таки. И каждому человеку предназначена гроб и могила. Это все опровержение того, что хотят свалить, что ДНР военные хоронят как братская могила у военных ВСУ. Это все обман, ложь.
So there you go. All it took was someone to go to Mariupol, but apparently, even though Mariupol is open and free, no Western media is interested in going to any of these sites where they claim, at least at the time, to be on the scene, where they claim these trigger events are happening, events that would trigger the shutting off of your electricity in Europe, to find out what was actually happening. Luckily, Eva went there, and it's bullshit. Basically, of course, people died in Mariupol. It was seriously and strenuously defended for a couple of weeks or more by Ukrainian forces, including the Azov battalion and neo-Nazi types, and the rest of them are now holed up in the Azovstal metallurgical plant, which has been blockaded, and there they'll stay until they decide what to do. But apparently they're not allowed to leave because they all have to die to the last Ukrainian in service to attempting to demonize Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But
that was an interesting development, wasn't it? The media was gearing up for, Russia is going to bombard Azovstal. So the Kiev government was putting out lots of statements. Initially, that thousands of civilians were in there with them. They whittled that down to hundreds, but nevertheless, that was the kind of, they were trying to forestall, it appeared, the Russian taking of the steelworks plant, or simply its bombardment from the air, by reminding everyone that there were civilians there too. And then Putin did this televised brief meeting with Shoigu, in which he said, I order you to cancel the, quote, storming of the Azovstal, just blockade it and let no one out. I thought I'd seen it earlier on. Someone had posted about a month ago a video uploaded somewhere claiming that it shows the footage was taken on February 24th, i.e. day one of Operation Z, showing tanks going into the main entrance of Azovstal. I suspect they knew from the outset that this is where it would end up. And they had, God knows what's in there, because I think it was kind of a trap of some kind that was set up. If it's true that there are hundreds of civilians in there with them.
Well, they've taken those civilians in there within themselves, is the thing. There's
themselves, they were either taken there by force, or they were scared into coming there and convinced that there would be months worth of supply of food.
Human shields is what a lot of the Ukrainian army has been using over the past 2 months. So that much is pretty clear from multiple testimonies of people from towns that have come under Russian control. And you don't find that in Western media, but you have to look on Telegram channels and stuff to see those reports directly from those people. But what people forget about Mariupol, and it is not mentioned at all in Mariupol, is that Mariupol is, at the very least, has been for a long time, a very much split city, split down the middle, not down the middle, but split amongst the population in terms of their allegiance. In 2014, when the US-backed coup happened, that kind of, give rise to all of this situation today, when the US backed a coup that got rid of the kind of Russian, aligned President Yanukovych, and installed a Washington regime, basically, that then gave rise to Zelensky, puppet Zelensky today. Mariupol, in the same way that people in Donetsk and Luhansk said they wanted no part of that new Western-backed anti-Russian regime in Kiev in 2014, people in Mariupol kind of voted with their feet against it in massive protests on the streets of Mariupol in 2014, saying that they wanted no part of it, like I said. And the Ukrainian military came in and put down that expression of popular disgust at a coup regime being imposed in Kiev that did not represent them, that was virulently anti-Russian.
I think similar happened in Kharkov.
Yeah. That's the thing. You don't get the history of this. The east of Ukraine is very much Russian aligned, and since 2014 has not been very happy with the new Washington installed government.
That is true of the east as a whole, and it shows in the election results in Ukraine until recently. But you said, you claimed that Mariupol specifically was split, kind of 50-50 divide. But nevertheless, I suppose you're saying that's sufficient numbers to have generated protests that were suppressed at the time. Yeah,
absolutely. It was. I mean, I don't even know. I wouldn't say that it was. I'd say Mariupol in general, overall, the significant majority of the population were Russophiles, let's say. They spoke Russian, they had a Russian culture, and they had, a lot of them would have family in Russia. Mariupol isn't very far from Russia. So for them to have to be forced to accept a new government installed by Washington, installed by the CIA effectively, that was against all things Russian, and by extension against them, and they showed in the conflict since then in 2014 in eastern Ukraine, they showed that they have absolute disdain for those people. They called them terrorists. Anybody who resisted, anybody who thought differently than the people in Kiev, and did not want to become anti-Russian, they were called terrorists.
That's what it all comes back to. That coup in 2014, Washington created this mess.
There's plenty of video. There's been several documentaries made on those events in 2014 in Mariupol, but there's one there, the MP4 I sent you, Scotty. It's Mariupol 1. It's just a short video. It'll give you an insight into events of that summer in 2014 in the immediate aftermath of the coup. Protest. Barricades to stop the Ukrainian army.
Люди блокируют живым щитом технику.
фашистов тут. Хватит, они себя показали, дискриминировали. Всю неправду показывают. Я участник событий на 9 мая. Я все видела своими глазами, как они безоружных людей, без палки даже люди были. Они их расстреливали, а показывают, СМИ показывают, что напали на них вооруженные ополченцы. У нашего человека ни одного не было даже палки.
Вот такая бесконечная очередь для голосования. Народ оживленный.
Secede.
So they had a vote to try and secede.
Yeah.
Well, that's the
but
kind
they
of
came out
democracy
straight
you
away.
can't have
Yeah.
for Washington.
But
Well,
they
you weren't kidding
killed a
when
lot
they
of
said-
people. And,
yeah.
On that day, it was May 9th, the kind of Veterans Day
Victory Day.
Victory Day in Russia, and it all kicked off then because people were, showing their kind of allegiance with Russia, or their alliance with Russia, and they decided they were going to take a stand against the coup, and it was put down.
Yeah, you weren't kidding when you said the military came in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
In my head, I thought, they just, threatened to do something. They
absolutely.
just ran
They killed a lot
tanks
of people.
over barricades.
But bottom line there is that you had ethnic Russian speakers who were protesting against, who weren't happy with being forced to be part of a country that had taken under the
A radical turn.
a radical turn, anti-Russian turn, and it was against their own ideology, their own beliefs, their own culture, their own language, effectively. So the idea of you're talking here about the right of people to self-determination, to not be aligned with a corrupt, tyrannical regime that wants to persecute them, and for 8 years. There was a war, has been a war fought against the people in Mariupol and in Donbass in general, to stop calling them terrorists and stopping them from asserting their right to self-determination and right to have their own beliefs and culture, religious beliefs, cultural beliefs, language, and that's a big part of what's going on in Ukraine today and why Russia has intervened. But you won't ever hear that, So yeah.
So Mariupol, is under Russian control.
And on the Mariupol, just throw up the Guardian article here. It's just the hypocrisy again. Is throw up the France says Russian Guardian article. Have a look at this. France says Russian mercenaries staged French atrocity in Mali. Russian mercenaries buried bodies near a Malian military base to falsely accuse France's departing forces of leaving behind mass graves, the French military has claimed. So apparently it can happen.
Right.
Apparently you can
have staged mass
graves.
Oh.
And the Guardian will report it if it's Russia who's doing it. But the idea that those mass graves that the Guardian reported on in Mariupol were staged in some way is not possible.
We would never.
That would never happen. But it doesn't matter, it's academic, because if a Bartlett goes there and says this isn't even a mass grave, you're talking shit. You're talking complete and utter shit. It's not even a mass grave. It's graves beside an existing cemetery for the people who have died as a result of the conflict there. End of story.
It's like false flags. They can happen, actually, after 2 decades of lampooning anyone who mentions the term. Well, actually, they can happen when Russia does them.
Yeah. We're talking earlier on about intent, deliberate intent, to make people suffer, to make European people suffer, that there's an agenda. This is a conspiracy theory, obviously. There's an agenda in some dark rooms or dark hallways of the Western halls of power to actually engineer a situation where people will suffer as a result of energy shortages and food shortages. Throw up that conspiracy website, sot.net, Scotty, the one I sent you.
Oh, don't be going to that website. It's terrible.
This is an interesting story. You may have heard about it. You probably may or may not have heard about it. But over the past 2 or 3 weeks, there have been officially the story. Tucker Carlson actually talked about it.
Yeah, I saw his report.
That there were 6, I think.
I heard 18, but
right. Well, actually, there's more. If you dig into it, there's more. But there's been let's call it a couple of dozen at least. Large food processing and distribution plants in the US have burned down or exploded or been destroyed in one way or another. First one is a large vegetable and nut processing facility in Durford, Oregon, engulfed in flames. It basically, 150 people worked there. It burned to the ground. A week before that, in Oregon, a massive fire brought down a meat processing plant in Conway, in Conway, New Hampshire. That burned for 16 hours. Facility is completely destroyed. That's the same week. Salinas, California, massive fire at the Taylor Farms processing facility that led to evacuation of residents as it burned for 17 hours. This is a major agriculture company that processes and delivers many of the salad kits seen in grocery stores. A couple of weeks before that, a massive fire engulfed a Walmart distribution center in Plainfield, in Indiana. Over 1,000 employees shipped food and other supplies all over the region. The fire destroyed a massive 1 million square foot operation. Wow. The same week, one of the largest food facilities of its kind in South Texas caught fire and burned to the ground. It grew, packed and shipped a variety of Texas-grown items, including sweet onions, melons, greens, cabbage, and kale. Cause of the fire in all these cases is currently unknown. Another one in Oregon in February, a massive food processing facility suddenly exploded, injuring 7 people.
Suddenly exploded.
Yeah.
I heard Tucker Carlson once said a mobile boiler unit had suddenly exploded.
Right. I've just scrolled down a bit more. The fact is that since last year, more than a dozen of these fires and explosions have taken place at food processing and distribution centers in the US.
Over a year, okay. But a lot recently.
A lot recently, but this is over a year. And then the tweet just below that, speech... that one down, Speech Alchemy, click the links. There's a list there in that tweet of 16 others, which total count is 28.
Wow.
And again, at the end of this, we see that, to be clear, in general, general warehouse fires are quite common. Fire departments respond to more than 1,000 a year in the US. However, the main cause of these fires is arson, the ones that we're talking about in food processing plants. The main cause of these fires is arson. Most of the fires in general warehouses are not caused by arson. What's more, fires in food processing facilities are not that common and occur far less often. So,
wow.
Intent? I don't know.
Tucker Carlson, I think, mentioned that 2 of them were hit by airplanes.
Yeah. If you expand that out, just to the point of view of this is looking bad because there's a lot of these facilities, for whatever reason, it's been bad luck because there's a lot of food processing and distribution facilities have been taken out of action. It's not good for the already existing problems in the supply chain or supposed existing problems in the supply chain. But if you look at in detail at those ones that we just looked at, a lot of them are unknown. They seem to be arson. It seems to be someone.
Arson is deliberately setting a fire.
Right.
That's
so, there's a
crazy.
certain number that happen by accident, including in food processing plants every year. But if you add in, and if someone is targeting large ones that, that wouldn't be under the law of accident type thing necessarily, but is targeting big processing plants
that require
arson,
massive 6-alarm fire, responses, and they don't succeed because the entire facility burns to the ground. Yeah. You're talking accelerants, intention for that to happen. Yeah. It reminds me of the phenomenon in France with the burning of churches. It's a whole other story, but around the time of the Notre Dame fire, that obviously got the most attention because Notre Dame. But there was another major fire 2 days prior, and they caught the woman attempting to set fire to Paris's oldest church. It was actually older, the Saint-Sepulchre, I think. Yeah. It's an older church than even Notre Dame. And she partially succeeded, and she was arrested. Didn't say of her origin, where she was from, but that she was mentally, unwell. Yeah. So that's just. There are other instances too where they've caught people. It's the extent and the scale of it. It's like, it's for what it's worth. It is a bona fide conspiracy theory widely discussed in France about what the hell is going on.
Right.
There,
Yeah.
The reason people are suspicious because it suggests willful destruction.
Right. There's some. I think it's reasonable to hold as a tentative conclusion that there is some group or groups of people in positions of power who are doing nefarious things deliberately that directly or may eventually directly impact the population in one way or another. That happens. That kind of thing actually happens. Not everything is an accident. There are people. There are actors. I mean that in the sense of people who act, who have agency and have power and influence, who have an agenda and who are doing things that are not good for the great mass of humanity. Let's say.
What do they want? They want to bring on the eschaton, or
they just like it. You want a simple answer? They just like it. They're that kind of people. They're that kind of person. They just like destruction and suffering. If you realize that, then you've probably realized a lot. If you can bring yourself to accept the idea. Shanghai, lockdown not over. Thought it was going to be kind of relieved or released a little bit, people of Shanghai, but they've kind of doubled down in the past couple of days.
Oh.
Go to CNN. One example is we talked about it last week actually, and this just kind of confirms it. The CNN article: extreme COVID measures have heavily restricted the lives of residents in both cities. That's Hong Kong and Shanghai. And then, once China's gateway to the west, heavy-handed border closures and suspended air routes have closed the two cities off to much of the world, even as other hubs open up. On Tuesday, just a single flight arrived in Hong Kong from outside Asia Pacific, a stark contrast to the pre-pandemic era when the city's airport was one of the world's busiest. Now most of the traffic is outbound, carrying residents fleeing Hong Kong for greener pastures. 180,000 people left the city, while only 39,000 entered.
So this is a whole other type of lockdown. This is like lockdown squared.
Yeah. Just scroll down a little bit more. Jörg Rückde, president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, estimates that China has lost about 50% of all European expatriates since the pandemic started. And he warns there could be another exodus of families this summer when the school year ends. So teachers leaving, basically a lot of people leaving. So the question there is, what's going on in China? Why are they doing this in Shanghai and Hong Kong and a few other places? Beyond all reason, we talked about it last week. We thought, well, listen, they can't be taking this Omicron business seriously. But if you look back, if you just go to newsweek.com, this is from March when Shanghai started, China kind of doubled down again on its lockdowns, on its COVID lockdowns. I think you have it, Scotty. Yeah, you do. It's the second link in the first list I sent you. Newsweek.com. This is from back then, and it kind of hasn't really been talked about, I suppose. But recently, they just talk about it as a.
Nope.
Yeah, you do. You have it. It's the second link in the first list I sent you after YouTube. First one was YouTube, the second one was Newsweek. I'll just send it to you again. A new subtype of the Omicron variant was recently found near Shanghai, China. Again, this is from March, as the country continues to battle its latest virus outbreak. So this is, the beginning of what's continuing on now. The latest iteration of the virus evolved from the BA.1 branch of Omicron and was isolated from a mild coronavirus patient in Suzhou City, near Shanghai. Scientists have said the subtype is not the same as other coronavirus strains that are causing outbreaks in the country, causing concern that it may pose a greater threat to the region. So that's basically it. That's the only thing I could really find that would suggest that the Chinese are dealing with something different from what SARS-CoV-2 has evolved into, i.e. Omicron, in the rest of the world. That it's different.
But by different, it's not just a strain of SARS-CoV-2, it will be something else altogether, despite what this Newsweek report says.
It's not the same. They say it's not, the subtype is not the same as other coronavirus strains, i.e. there's all these coronavirus strains, right? Alpha, beta, delta, whatever, leading to Omicron. but this is something that's different, and I haven't found any reference to such a thing in anywhere else in the world, basically. Which, and I suppose, without saying much, just throw up the JPEG biolabs. That is actually from the DoD, Department of Defense. They're the recognized biolabs, or admitted to biolabs, Department of Defense biolabs around the world. There, as we know now, they've only got one in Ukraine, as you see, but there's something like 13 in Ukraine, so you can multiply those little icons by a lot more in other countries around China. And in the context of the bellicose rhetoric and warmongering that the US has been engaging in over the past number of years against China and its threats towards China on a similar level to those against Russia, the Chinese have to take it seriously when they see, and the Chinese have mentioned when the Russians mentioned their discovery of biolabs in Ukraine, the Chinese backed them up publicly and said, yeah, we'd like to know what's going on in these labs that you have all around the country. Now you put that together and then you see China having a fairly extreme reaction to a new subtype, what they're calling a new subtype that isn't known before of SARS-CoV-2. You have to wonder if they don't basically have an eye to some kind of a bio warfare attack, that, or at least that they suspect a biowarfare attack
they
against
suspect. That's the thing.
China.
Is it doing anything? Is this preemptive? Is it doing it? Or has it already produced results? So, well, what is giving them the suspicion to do lockdown, like,
Don't know.
square? That's what.
Yeah.
Like, that's extreme. Only one flight came in. The flights were coming in and out of China throughout
Hong Kong, yeah, for
February,
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
March 2020.
But there's something very strange about this, and I mean, at this point, I know we talked about it last week, but at this point, the only thing I can think of is that it would be that the Chinese are at the very least suspicious that there's something going on, or they have evidence that there's something going on in terms of. But you have something to tell us about that.
Yeah, you mentioned 13 biolabs in Ukraine. Russia has updated its latest info. Let's have a look at this. This is a report by an Indian analyst writer. The headline is kind of sensational, but the details are crazy. Migratory birds of mass destruction. Subtitle: The Russians have made the shocking claim that they are actually in possession of migratory birds digitized in the Pentagon's biolabs. Scroll down. I think we've got to read most of this because it's... Okay, so first of all, the information he's getting comes from watching it, and the video is embedded in this article. The latest Russian official presentation of what it has discovered in Ukraine, linking together with some other information, I guess, concerning Pentagon biolabs in other countries. And it was presented at a special meeting of the UN, I think in Geneva this week. Let's start reading. The UN Security Council held an extraordinary event on April 6th, 2 weeks ago, under the rubric of some formula meeting on biological security. Predictably, the US and UK representatives didn't show up at the event, and the Western media also blacked out the proceedings. The highlight of these proceedings, lasting over 2 hours, was the disclosure by General Igor Kirillov, Chief of the Radiation, Chemical and Biological Defense Forces of the Russian Armed Forces, that Washington is creating biological laboratories in different countries and connecting them to a unified system. He said the US has spent more than $5 billion on military biological programs since 2005 and detailed that in territories bordering Russia and China alone, about 60 facilities have been modernized during this period. The Ukrainian network of labs is designed to conduct research and monitor the situation. It consists of 30 facilities in 14 populated locations. He goes on to claim that highly sensitive materials from these labs in Ukraine were exported to the US in early February, just before the Russian operation began. And the rest were ordered to be destroyed lest they fall into Russian hands. But the cover-up was only partially successful because, indeed, Russia is now in possession of highly incriminating evidence. Scroll down. There's a video embed. It's 2 hours long. You can watch. This is the General Kirillov. He speaks in English. Okay, and just below it, Russia has made specific allegations pointing the finger at Pentagon funding for the biolabs in Ukraine. There are locations in not just Ukraine, but 36 countries around the world. The Russians say that diseases and epidemics on which research work is ongoing.
Focusing on the means for their release, the countries where they are being tested, and of course, experiments relating to coronavirus and bats used to transmit the virus.
Scroll down a bit there. However, the US has so far, of course, point blank refused to accept any supervision and verification of such evidence.
And go to the mind-boggling there.
A mind-boggling discovery that Russian forces in Ukraine stumbled upon is the use of numbered birds by these labs. This almost falls out of science fiction. The project works something like this. To begin with, the Pentagon accesses the scientific data available with environmental specialists and zoologists after studying the migration of birds and observing them throughout the seasons. Scroll down. On the basis of this data, groups of birds are caught, digitized, and capsules of germs are attached to them that carry a chip to be controlled through computers. The birds are then released to the flock of migratory birds in those target countries toward which the US intelligence has malevolent intentions. Of course, these birds travel great distances, like, for example, albatrosses can go all around the world, but they track them, and during the long flight of birds that have been digitized, numbered basically, in these labs, their movement is monitored step by step by means of satellites and their exact locations determined. The idea is that if the CIA or whoever has a requirement to inflict harm on, say, Russia or China or India for that matter, the chip is destroyed when the bird is in the skies. Plainly put, kill the bird carrying the epidemic. Once the digitized bird is killed and the capsule of germs it carries is released, this disease spreads. It becomes a highly cost-effective method of harming an enemy country without any need of war or coup d'etat or color revolution. The Russians have made the shocking claim that they are actually in possession of such migratory birds digitized in the Pentagon's biolabs.
Yeah, this is. I
think it's.
Well, the Russians made this claim
whenever
they first, not long after they were in Ukraine, and there was that situation around one of the labs in Kharkiv, I think, and they got access to information. The Russians made that claim like over a month ago, and the Western media did carry it. If you just throw up that article,
because of Hunter Biden's connection,
I sent it. Yeah. But it was all hushed up, and when it was reported on, what you got was this. Russia makes claims of US biological weapon, fears claims of plot to use birds to spread disease could be a pretext for biological attack by Russia itself. That was the way it was spun at the time, and it was end of story. This is just Russia kind of like projecting or using this as a ruse to cover up what they're planning to do themselves, which is a biological attack in Ukraine. Because, of course, Russia wants to drop a bunch of biological weapons in Ukraine and kill all of the Ukrainian people. That's the narrative, right? So everybody has to believe that. So and ignore the facts that point to something else. Yeah, it's crazy, but
well, it's not crazy to us. And anyone who's been paying attention before this, Bulgarian investigative journalist Dilyana Gaitensheva, she's been, I think that slide you showed of admitted DOD labs, well, that has to be massively updated now because there are obviously a lot more. If there's 60 around just Russia and China alone. Anyway, Dilyana's research into this kind of global ring and the connections between them. There are some documents that she found before they were removed from some public sites showing the extent to which they're connected via research and funding. It's a global system.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
The Russians are not smoking crack here when very much Hunter Biden is smoking crack.
Yeah,
but, the Russians are, it's a reality-based assessment. And you know that they know that it's reality-based, even if the details are off, because they just don't turn up to a UN meeting about it. They don't report on it. If they do report, they preempt where they suspect the Russians are going with something and just say, Russia's about to do it.
Yeah.
They're about to use birds to spread the plague.
Yeah.
There, that's it. Dusted. I'm not mentioning it again.
Debunked. Yeah. Crazy world we live in. But, I mean, it's the
Are
reality.
they that mad? Are they that determined to
Absolutely. You think about the
shit
people
all
in
over the world?
You think about people in the it's been for a very long time. I mean, do a bit of research into the history of chemical weapons development or biological weapons development, and you realize that people have been working this for a very long time. And it relates to SARS-CoV-2 and relates to the research, gain of function research and all that kind of stuff. It's a big, it's part of reality. It's part of what these people do, and and as most people know or should know, the gain of function research, which is taking viruses and weaponizing them effectively, making them transmissible, taking viruses that are not transmissible among humans and making them transmissible among humans, is gain of function research, and has been conducted for a very long time by Western governments and several governments around the world going back a very long time, and the only plausible explanation for it, which is really doesn't hold up, is that we have to weaponize these viruses that pose no threat to humanity. We have to make them a threat to humanity in order to see what would happen. It's like, you know what? I can tell you what would happen when you weaponize a virus and make it transmissible among humans. You're going to kill a lot of people. Do you really need to do that? And of course, I'm not saying that that's done and it has been, those kind of things have been released or been used or whatever, but there's a military aspect to it. There's obviously
You're not saying that everyone on board with this stuff sets out to do that.
No, or that is their intent.
Yeah.
Of course, they would say that we'll make sure they won't get released. We have these certain levels of security,
BSL-4,
BSL-4,
blah, blah,
etc. And we can make sure they never get released. But it's good to know what would happen in that situation. Again, I mean, it's not a very valid argument, because that argument has not held up, and that kind of gain of function research has been shut down by governments in the past. That argument notwithstanding, i.e. that argument wasn't
Right.
valid enough. It's like, look,
The
you
US
don't
government
need
formally ended it.
right, and then started it up again.
So did they start it up again in an official
2017,
capacity, or
yeah.
was that done
Officially in 2017,
So
yeah.
that was, and it was 2014 that they ended. So 3 years it lasted.
Right. And someone said, no, we really got to get back to this. So yeah, that kind of thing happens, and you're naive if you think it doesn't, and you're just ignorant if you think it doesn't, but you're also naive if you think that certain people, given the opportunity, would not use that kind of a biological weapon in order to achieve their political or geopolitical or whatever ideological goals. But that's all part of the reality-based community. If you're not a member of the reality-based community, then you just stick with the BBC and the Guardian and whatever.
Because they
else.
have satellite images that prove things.
Yeah, they don't need people on the ground. Anyway, I ain't got nothing more, and it's been 2 hours.
Prediction: Le Pen or Macron? What's the latest?
I'm not even going to go there. I want to be
In France, there's an
exit polls.
exit poll, but not until
It'll be an hour or two.
yeah,
couple
it's
hours.
too early for that.
And they don't tend to release them. They don't tend to speculate. The French are very good about not speculating until they have some hard data, like those Russian mercenaries creating fake mass graves in Mali, just as the Americans were leaving, or as the French were leaving. Anyway, yeah. So we'll wait and see. But I wouldn't expect much change anyway, one way or the other. It'd be nice if Le Pen got in, because it would make a change from the norm. But you have to question. In this day and age, you have to question the validity of Western democracy and the basis of it, which is safe and secure elections. Again, reality-based community people have reasonable suspicions about the safety and security of the electoral process in Western countries. Reason to be suspicious of it in the context of everything else you know about how the world actually works.
And don't take conspiracies here. Every single media outlet in France is for Macron against Le Pen.
Yeah.
Every government in the EU, which normally protocol is you don't interfere or mention, they're all pleading with the French people to vote for Macron over Le Pen.
Well, 4 or 5 years ago,
So that's influence.
4 or 5 years ago, the great and the good in Western democracies admitted openly that the Western democracy, in this case the American electoral process, was not safe and secure because Russia was able to hack it and deny Hillary Clinton the win in 2016. So again, these things happen just like false flags and fake mass burials and fake and staged provocations, staged killings and all that kind of stuff. They all happen, but only, and I repeat, only when Russia does it. The West never, ever, ever does that.
No, only Russia.
So
maybe China.
Yeah.
China doesn't vote. Backwards.
Yeah, weirdos. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for this week, folks. We hope you enjoyed the show. We are going to leave it there, aren't we?
We are going to leave it there.
Okay.
I'm done. But
I'm done. And everybody...
Some admin, though. There won't be a live show next week.
You never know, though. I might do one of my own.
All righty, then. There might be a live show.
No, I'd be surprised. Maybe. You never know.
If not, we'll probably do one mid next week. May 3rd or so.
Of course, it depends on what happens.
Yeah.
If, what could happen? I don't know. If an albatross flies over Washington D.C. and drops
with a capsule
and drops it on Congress, then we'll have to report it. Yeah. So thanks for. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for commenting. Commenting is always good. Don't forget to smash all the buttons. Even if you smashed them before, just smash them again because smashing is good. And
then buy a new keyboard.
And we'll be back next week or soon thereafter with another show, keeping you up to date. So until then, have a good whatever.
See you next week. Bye.
See ya.
Can't stop the signal now.